Thank you. I wanted to clarify a point earlier. There was a question to you about how many were killed, and the last number we had heard is 100. Can you help me understand, has that number changed? Do you have reason to believe it will change, or do you continue to believe that it's 100?
So that number, to my knowledge, has not changed. As we continue to understand what happened and assess that engagement, that's from my position, that's the number that's been reported and still being assessed, and I'm fairly certain that will continue to happen.
And 300 to 500 still remains true in terms of number of fighters who approached the U.S. forces.
Yes, ma'am. We're saying a battalion-sized unit that was dismounted. In other words, there were some that continued on that attack, and those numbers are a best estimate.
And last Friday, Secretary Mattis said that the U.S. was still seeking clarity on the forces it had struck, and you've also said that you didn't want to speculate on the composition of those forces. I'd like to know if you could respond to critics who say that it's either an intelligence failure or disconcerting that the U.S. military is conducting strikes in Syria on forces that it's not sure what its composition is made up of.
So I guess I missed the question there. Can you repeat the question?
I'd like you to, if you could, please respond to critics who would say that either it's an intelligence failure or at best disconcerting that the United States is conducting strikes in Syria on a group of forces that it's not sure the composition of. Is it that you know the composition of parts of it? There's a concern about the U.S. conducting airstrikes with the level of air power that it used, and now saying it's not sure who precisely it struck.
No, okay, thank you for that. I apologize. I couldn't exactly hear what that question was, and I understand it at this point. So I think the first thing I'd remind you of is, this was executed from self-defense, and we're going to defend ourselves. And as was reported, there was incoming fire, and we were with the SDF, hunkered down, not provoking, and a force is massing and coming at us. So we're going to defend ourselves. And we all need to be crystal clear about that, just as Secretary Mattis said. So we're going to do that first, defend ourselves appropriately, and then as you highlight, we've got to work through exactly who it was to understand that. And, at the point that we've got clarity on that, we'll let higher decide when that is in terms of those types of timelines. But I think it's important to recognize that it's not as simple to sort out exactly who everybody is down there. And so we need to allow that to work its way through.
Sir, if I could just, two quick follow-ups. One, have you done any site exploitation where the pro-regime force was massing? And two, do you know if any bodies were recovered by the other side? And then I have a quick follow-up.
So relative to your first question, certainly we continue to watch that area and ensure that our SDF partners and our coalition advisors that remain in those positions are aware of any other threats that might be coming towards them, much as we did prior to that initial attack. Our goal here is to get back to fighting ISIS. And so the intent here is to ensure we protect ourselves, maintain good operational understanding of the environment around our partners and our coalition advisors while prosecuting the fight against ISIS. So that's job one. And, as far as NESSC, if we're doing that, that's going to be something that we want to keep close hold and make sure that we're protecting our operational security and the details associated with that. Finally, with respect to the bodies, I have no knowledge of any of those bodies getting pulled out of there, and can't comment on that.
And just to follow up kind of on Barb's question, when you guys say in the future that this was a pro-regime force, not specifically to this incident, but does pro-regime force always rule out regime force?
So specific to pro-regime forces, I think it's important that as we talk about that, clearly it's encompassing a wide group of folks that I guess what I want to bring you back to is the fact that this was self-defense. And while we're spending a lot of time talking about this, this is a hostile force that was coming after our partners and coalition advisors. And so we're going to defend ourselves. I think as we work through the assessment, right now, pro-regime forces is probably the best definition we have to describe who they were.
I'm going to do a quick follow-up here because I didn't quite hear an answer. When you say pro-regime force, does that rule out forces that are commanded by the Assad government?
Those are all that's all part of the regime and pro-regime forces. So I guess the specific answer to your question would be pro-regime forces is going to involve all those that are supporting the regime.
Lucas?
General, you mentioned you want the focus on ISIS, but it seems like as ISIS is largely being crushed in Iraq and Syria, your forces and partner forces are increasingly under attack from Turkish-backed forces, from Russian-backed forces, from Syrian-backed forces, and from these, quote, pro-regime forces. Can you discuss the challenges that are facing your forces on the ground in this new environment?
Hey, that's a great question because it clearly is a very complicated and complex environment. And for both our forces on the ground and I would say for our forces in the air, this environment requires the professionalism and discipline of a force that's able to manage and understand the environment such that we can make timely decisions in terms of understanding, number one, how we're going to protect ourselves, and then number two, get after the ISIS fight. So I would share with you that each and every day we are trying to ensure that as folks are preparing for those operations that support the de-ISIS fight, we have as best an understanding of what the Turkish and Russian forces are doing today so that we can continue to get after ISIS and prosecute that fight. Because what I'd highlight to you there is while we have pressured them and done some great work to deny them of the physical caliphate, there's a pretty significant fight still going down in the southern part of the Euphrates River Valley, and so that's an important piece that I would share with you. That while we've had to defend ourselves, that part of the fight is still ongoing, and we continue to prosecute it.
And can you discuss in detail about what happened last weekend? It appears that U.S. forces came under attack for a second time in a week. Do you think that attack in eastern Syria was linked to the Iranian drone flying over Israel? And can you rule out that any Russian troops or Russian-backed forces were killed in those in the U.S. response?
So first, I'd highlight that I am not connecting any of the Iranian activities specifically to what happened with the force that attempted again to target our SDF partners and the coalition advisors there. We were in a position, again, that's a defensive position that we've been operating out of, and as we were doing what I would call normal operations in terms of getting back after ISIS and ensuring that our area was secure, we detected and saw a tank that took a shot at us. It continued to move. So we again executed self-defense rules of engagement to protect ourselves. And I believe that was something that, again, we always have the right to do, and we'll make sure we're in a position to do that. And can you repeat again the second part of the question?
You rule out that Russian citizens or any Russians of any kind were driving that T-72 tank or any of these tanks that were firing on your forces?
I don't know who was driving it, and so it's not going to be helpful for me to try to sort that out at this particular time. I'm not just going to speculate on that right now.
Good.
Hey, General, just real quickly, elsewhere in your AOR, does the U.S. still plan to support Saudi refueling missions in Yemen over the next year?
Yes, sir. We continue to support them with air refueling and also in an advisory capacity. And that has remained our policy, and we'll continue to support that.
Thank you. And is that just for the Saudis, or is that for the UAE and the whole mission?
It is for both of them.
Lily?
Thank you, General. What is the level of threat posed by the terrorist safe havens in Pakistan? What is the level of threat posed by the terrorist safe havens inside Pakistan?
Just so I make sure I understood the question, you're asking what the level of threat posed by Pakistan is?
Safe havens inside Pakistan, what threat they pose to your operations inside Afghanistan?
Okay, thank you for that. We continue to work closely with our Pakistan partners, and what I would tell you is, first off, our intent is to make sure that Pakistan continues their fight against terrorists and does all that they can to support not only protecting themselves but also protecting coalition and Afghan partners that are operating there. And so they continue to execute that, and it is something that we consistently work with our intelligence community to understand.
Okay. Joe?
Thank you. General, I would like to go back to what happened over the weekend in the Israeli airspace. Could you confirm that the drone that was shot down was an Iranian drone?
So I've probably read the same reports that you have, and that's the publicly available information that's out there. And from our perspective, that's what we're reading. Probably best to talk with the Israelis and get their opinion, because they'll have the best information.
Quick follow-up, sir. From your perspective, do you think shooting down an Israeli F-16 represents a change in the rules of engagement by the Syrian regime or the Iranian regime?
Well, it doesn't represent a change for us on the U.S. side. Has the Israelis approached that again? You'll have to get with them and their perspective on it. Again, I think importantly from my perspective, it's important that we understand the status of the integrated air defense system so that we can continue to fight our de-ISIS fight. And as we continue to execute that, that's something I'm always watching and keeping an eye on.
Okay, last follow-up, sir. Do you know how the F-16 was shut down? Could you confirm that Russian-made S-200 anti-aircraft missiles were launched against the F-16, the Israeli F-16?
So I'm not going to speculate specifically on what we know or don't know. I think it's important to understand that the Israelis have the right to defend themselves and any threats to their territory. or their people. And so I think that's important to remember. And, quite frankly, they'll have the best information on what they believe took down that particular airplane.
Jeff Shogel.
Thank you. General Jeff Shogel with Task and Purpose. I believe you said that the JTACs called in airstrikes and artillery strikes for 3 hours involving B-52s. Can you give us a sense of how many bombs and how many shells were used in this 3 hours?
Hey, thanks for that. I don't mean to be flippant about this, but there are a lot. And those guys did some phenomenal work. While I'm highlighting the JTACs, they were working closely with the ground commander and under significant pressure and in a very intense environment. And they basically were able to manage that situation and self-defend themselves and the SDF partners in a magnificent fashion. And frankly, I'm proud of the work they did.
If I could follow up, the fact that any pro-regime forces survived that hurricane of fire, is it accurate to say your goal was not to kill all of them?
Our goal is to defend ourselves in that situation, and that's what that was all about. And so as I highlighted to you, once that ground commander, who was the closest guy to the fight, felt that he had defended himself and he was no longer threatened by that force, we ceased at that particular point. And that's his decision and his decision alone. And I think it's important that all of us that want to look back in this recognize how he handled that and those decisions that were made, and I applaud his efforts.
Can you just give us a ballpark of a lot in terms of shells and bombs, maybe tonnage-wise?
Maybe at some other point we can take a look at that. But, one thing I'll just tell you, we need to be sensitive to how we go out and do this and how we defend our force. These are operational details that for me are important to protecting our guys on the ground and how we go out there and employ every day. So, I recognize you'd like to have that answer, but I don't want to give away any inkling of how we do business so that we're able to do it every day and every night.
All right, so right before I get to Jamie, so we've got 6 in the queue, and we're running out of time. So if we can stop doing 3 and 4 questions and just do 1 and a follow-up, that way we can try to get everybody, please. Thank you. Jamie?
I just have one question. It's Jamie McIntyre with the Washington Examiner. Again, one more about the Israeli strikes over the weekend and how it affects your mission. After those strikes, a spokesman for the Israeli government said that they estimated they had taken out, quote, half of the Syrian air defenses. Do you share that assessment? And if you don't share the assessment precisely, was there a significant degradation of the integrated air system such that it might mitigate the threat against the planes that you're flying in that airspace?
Hey, thanks for that. First off, I'll just kind of come back to how I hit that before, and that no impact to our mission. Based on where we're operating and what we're executing, there have been no impacts to us as we continue to monitor the status of the integrated air defense system. With respect to what it ultimately did to their IADs, clearly we're taking a look at that. You'll have to go back to the Israelis to determine how they developed that assessment. But we're continuing to look at that, look at the big picture with respect to their capabilities going forward, and that'll be something that goes into our assessment moving forward. But again, I'll highlight that at this point, no impacts to our mission.
Louis?
Hey, General. Lou Martinez with ABC News. Given that this was a 3-hour defensive action, I mean, how complex was the ground attack? And was there a persistently offensive action on the part of that battalion-sized element throughout that time? And just how close did their ordnance get to the SDF headquarters that you were co-located at?
Thanks. First off, with respect to complexity, I'm not going to go into the specific details of exactly what they were doing, but they had a plan. They were looking to execute it, and I would tell you that the ground force commander and I personally talked with the JTACs, and it was persistent. Those entities, our team on the ground in coordination with the SDF, did some phenomenal work to defend themselves and then manage in the middle of the night a very complex environment that incorporated surface-to-surface, air-to-surface fires to defend themselves. That's what we trained them to do. That's what they executed, and they did it in fantastic fashion. What was the last part? You were three-parting me there. So what was the last part of it?
How close did their ordnance get to the SDF headquarters? And was there actual ground-to-ground firefight involved?
I won't get into the specifics of exactly how close they got, but let there be no doubt the ground force commander felt threatened, so he responded, leveraging the assets he had available to him.
General, if you could just shift to Afghanistan quickly. The plan was to be moving a lot of the assets from the ISIS campaign over to Afghanistan, things like J-Stars and tankers and rivet joints. Has any of that slowed or been impacted by Turkey's operations and the unexpected tempo of things going on still in Syria? And in Afghanistan, can you talk a little bit about the increase in close air support sorties and these strikes on the drug labs, the whole campaign? How's it started off for the first couple months now that we're into February?
Okay, I guess what I'd highlight first is the beauty of air power in that we're able to flexibly, in a very agile fashion, switch from AOR to AOR. So as we work with both the OIR headquarters and the Resolute Support headquarters, we gather their requirements and then allocate the assets based on how we can best support them. So what I would share with you is that we've been able to ensure that when required, we've had the decisive air power required, whether that be for ISR, target development, overwatch, those type of activities. We have what we need. And we've been able to manage that. And then as we've flown sorties in support of the deliberate air campaign in Afghanistan, I think what you've seen is we've proven that we've been able to develop targets and keep a steady drumbeat of activity to maintain and sustain pressure on the Taliban and targets that we've been able to develop in Afghanistan. So while Turkish activities and other operations have occurred inside of Iraq and Syria, what I would tell you is we've ensured we've had the appropriate combat power and enablers to execute those mission sets. As far as close air support missions in Afghanistan, again, what we've been able to do is work closely with the Resolute Support headquarters to understand their requirements and then provide that air support that's necessary to support the Afghan partners on the ground and our deliberate air campaign. And as you know, we plussed up with some A-10s over there, and I think you've read probably some reports where they've already proven within 24 hours we were leveraging them to support both the air campaign and forces on the ground.
Brian?
Just to follow up on that, on this new offensive against the Taliban, when it kicked off in November, you had F-22s flying the first strikes, and we were told it was because they needed to drop the SDB. Was that a one-time thing, or have the Raptors continued flying over the horizon? And second, you mentioned that the Pavehawks are returning, and just a few months ago, the Pavehawks were taken out, and you stood up the Joint Army-Air Force personnel rescue flying Chinooks. Are the new Pavehawks in addition to that, or why did you change pace, bringing the Pavehawks out and then back in?
So first on the Raptor question, as you're probably aware, yes, we did use them. We have not used them since. We could if we needed to. but based on when that occurred, and as you highlighted, the requirement for small diameter bombs, we brought the Raptors over there. You know, in and amongst all this discussion, as you're probably aware, as we look at targets, we're going to match the best weapon for that particular target. And based on the assets that we had at that time in theater, Raptors made the most sense. Relative to the question on the HH-60s, again, my responsibility as I look across Afghanistan is to make sure we've got the appropriate assets to cover down on folks that are flying out there. So the HH-60s are going to be in addition to what we have out there in terms of the Chinooks to make sure we're properly postured to support both the ground and air entities operating out there.
Hi, sir. Oriana Pollock with Military.com. Can you confirm for me on that strike against the tank over the weekend that that was an MQ-9 Reaper that took the strike? And secondly, what were you all observing, or what was the MQ-9 observing in order for someone to deem it credible enough to take the shot against the tank?
So first, yes, it was an MQ-9. And then second, I'll go back to the concept of self-defense and how we rely upon our folks that are on the ground to make that decision, primarily the ground force commander. And what happened in that particular scenario is the tank that fired was within an effective range to target our SDF and advisors on the ground, which clearly provides him the ability to defend himself, and he made that decision appropriately so, and that was the result.
Thanks.
We're going to finish up with Lucas.
General, have there been any other attacks besides the strike on Saturday against the tank and then against the battalion last week? Any more attacks between these pro-regime forces and U.S. troops, U.S. Special Ops troops, and their allies in eastern Syria?
None that I'm aware of.
And you destroyed one tank over the weekend. Did any tanks get away?
Not that I'm aware of.
Is that in either engagement? Did any tanks get away?
Not that I'm aware of.
Sir, thank you very much for your time today. Do you have any closing remarks for the group?
No, let me just thank everyone there for the good questions, and I think you know it's important to understand the ROE associated with self-defense and its applications, and clearly we've got some folks on the ground that have to make some very tough decisions, and I think it should be crystal clear to anyone that's going to attempt to prosecute an attack on us that will be a very long day for them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, and thanks for what you do for keeping our forces in the air and on the ground safe. That's Air Power. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes today's briefing. Have a good day.
Sure we're done.